Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak on Citizen Television. Thank you for staying with us. We, of course, welcome your contributions here on the broadcast. The hashtag on Twitter is Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya, and at Ayub Abdikadir. With me in studio is Julius Meli, who is the Member of Parliament representing Tindred constituency in the National Assembly, as well chairs the Parliamentary Education Committee. He's joined by Amos Kaburu, who is an education commentator, and Dr. James Sierra, who is a Kenya country lead towards West Africa, which launched a report on Tuesday detailing the response by Kenyans and their feedback on the competency-based curriculum vis-a-vis the 844 system of education. Thank you for your time, gentlemen. And Amos, you had a point before we went on break. Yes, proceed, please.
Yeah, I was talking about this issue of the configuration of our financing. And the challenge with our financing of education or resourcing of our education in this country is that it's very, very conservative. It's still being driven by the same drivers that drove us many years ago. We're talking about population, we're talking about our conservative curriculum and such. And so what you realize that such a financing or such a resourcing model will never work, because the numbers will keep on going higher, the costs will keep on increasing, inflation will be hitting, and as such we can never catch pace. You ask yourself some of these questions. Where is the place of technology in all this? Why are we designing a curriculum that is still expensive, whereby we're still believing that the teacher, we're moving away from what you call the teacher is the center of knowledge towards where a teacher is a facilitator. But yet again, our configuration of the same teaching resource still assumes that the teacher will be at the center of it. Why are we moving away even small areas, increasing learning areas from 7 to 14 at junior secondary? Honorable Meli, what you're going to realize is that education will be super expensive. And correctly, as you put it, that in another 3-4 years, whatever we are calling today a deficit of 116,000 could even have risen even maybe to double or even triple. And that is the reason as to why institutions that are charged with the responsibility of designing our education must also be cognizant of the resourcing basket that this country has. That we cannot keep on designing an education assuming that we have got infinite resources. That is a challenge that we keep on facing. That's why we kept on assuming that with 1020 we moved to 1420. The government has come in, pay for examinations, 60%, some cases 40% of CDF money is going to us, bursaries. You realize county governments are still giving money to us, bursaries, but still education is not becoming cheaper. That is a question that we must ask ourselves. So we cannot keep on designing an education from a very, very conservative approach, the way we used it 20 years, 30 years down the line. This country will basically grind to a halt if we continue thinking and working the same way. Okay.
Dr. James, when you look at the feedback from the respondents that you surveyed, clearly there is a large portion of the population who are in support of the 844 system, citing challenges amongst other issues, the finances they are in, and how it's burdening parents. But again, ideally, why the CBC was formulated was to address some of the gapping issues in our education system and create equity. Schools, therefore, because are seen as social engines that drive the society. But when you have more than 38% of Kenyans who still have confidence in the 844 system, are we not gradually maintaining the status quo of the stratification of the Kenyan society in the context of education?
I think you're right in a way, and I've had stories where we have some parents who have children in grade 6 and they're colluding with head teachers so that these children can be enrolled so that they can be able to sit for KCPE. Mm-hmm. So you can see how parents are taking the news, whatever. But one thing that we need to address, and I want to go back to some survey we did last year when we had the election with IBC. We did 2 surveys, one at the beginning, of which we found there are a lot of issues that citizens had raised about the IBC. And then we sat down and we discussed. And I'm so happy because they'll be able to reach the right people, the target groups, as in they repackaged the information. And after like 2 months, citizens were a little bit happy. I think there was a 20% increase. So the same thing can happen. I like CBC because the way the fundamentals of CBC is to promote equity and all that, and to expose the students to and be able to solve the 21st century challenges. But one thing that we need to ask ourselves, has the ministry done something to enlighten citizens the difference between the two, because that's the basis of the kind of findings we got. Have they packaged the information such that someone in the rural area can be able to understand that here we have 844 and here we have CBC. These are the advantages. So I think they need to go back to the drawing board, because if they keep on pushing it without enlightening or finding easier ways to enhance the enlightenment on the citizen side, I think the citizens are not willing to buy in the new idea, of which, to me, I think it's a good move, because we have many things that need to be addressed, but the way they pack the information or the awareness level, yes, it's there, but people don't have the right information. Because
costing is one thing that you have cited.
Yes.
And the burden otherwise, which comes to the CBC according to your survey, is that the reason as to why they are circumventing the normal procedure of grade 7, 8, and 9 and then registering their learners for KCPE?
Yeah, I think they don't have trust on the new system, and they prefer people, because they're used to it. Maybe most of their parents went through 844, so they're much more confident. The information they have a lot of information compared to this other one. Another thing which I think the government need in terms of lowering the cost, I don't think they have really utilized technology, because I believe, like when we have teacher shortage and all that, I think the government has already done a lot in terms of providing TV, whatever, the computers and all that. And I think one teacher can be able to handle like a class of even 200, and probably can have even online transmission of this information. If we had it in 1980s, where we used to have radio classes, what about now? We have the penetration, mobile phone penetration and all that. Why are you not harnessing on this? And probably these are the ways in which we can be able to embrace and can be able to lower the cost of education.
Okay, we'll look at the place of technology. Yes, Honorable Mele, go ahead.
Let me just say something on the cost. I think the cost has actually been hyped to an extent that if you look at the costing in terms of implementation on between CBC and 844, many parents who are conservative would say, we wish the 844 system to continue, because they themselves went through it, they would wish their children go through it, and they know that this 844 actually classifies children on merit. That's why the other day I want to allow the ministry for not actually giving us ranking of both students and schools. This is quite very archaic, very old way of doing things. I want to tell you, Ayub, that in this country that we want everyone in the CBC class system will not have failed. Everyone will go through this education system, but with different abilities and competencies across the education system. So that when an learner goes into grade 7 today, what we are talking or telling the parents, and that's what the ministry and the government needs to do, is to really do a lot of public education, awareness, that the child leaves grade 6 and goes to grade 7. He doesn't pay a cent. He sits down. He's provided textbooks. He's taught by the teacher. And that's why we are telling the Ministry of the Teacher Service Commission to mop up the graduates who are within the primary sector, who have the requisite skills and competencies to teach in grade 7. I know they identified about 10,000, and I think there are more than that. There are about 20 or 30,000 teachers who are already qualified. So if you mop up all that and add the 30,000 who are recruited,
yes,
the grade 7 classes will kick on without a problem. Look at this vis-a-vis the Form 1 entries of the 844. They'll pay fees in Form 1, the 30 or 20,000. They will go to a boarding school. Majority of the CBC schools, as we talked of today, are day schools. So the issue of cost is quite mythical. It is quite hyped. And I don't know why some parents say it's expensive. Why some politicians say it's expensive. And yet the child is walking in to the classroom in the grade 7. He's being taught by a secondary school teacher employed the other day. The parent doesn't pay fees, doesn't pay any amount. Unless the Ministry of Education allows these principals to charge the 9,000 shillings, the head teachers, which we are saying as a leadership and as a country, it is illegal and should not be allowed to continue. 2, when you look at the conservative nature of our society, and that is the nature of mankind, change is not actually taken in easily. I was doing, as a student of comparative studies, I've been looking at the implementation trend in the 844 in 1984-85. Students just moved from class 7 to class 8. There wasn't any preparatory activities done. This time, the student moved from PP1, PP2 to grade 6. there was a lot of activities done. The only thing is that the way the society is structured is that many of us are actually afraid of change. And that's why you'll hear, what is the future of this? How is the country going forward to do? Immediately after this system is rolled through to grade 12, many of the parents will realize that this is a system that will stop inequalities. A student in the northeastern region or a student in the slums will be able to go through the system without any problem, because the alliances of this country are only meant for those students from very good day schools, boarding schools, very high-cost primary schools, will go to the top national secondary schools. But in the CBC system, we want to make one school system where a child starts from grade 1 and lives in grade 12 without any problem.
Okay, and before I come to Amos, this week the commission appeared before you, and it's during that session that the Chief Executive Officer, Nancy Macharia, did say that the commission has, true, and I quote her, verification of personal files identified 10,833 with the requisite qualification as eligible for deployment
as at that time.
Schools. As at that time.
Yes, because the verification is going on.
Okay.
Yes.
And was there specific timing attached to hit the 30,000 requirement?
No, the 30,000 requirement, and let me just make it clear, the 30,000 are the new graduates, the new employees. These others are actually the actual employed teachers who are in the service.
Redeployed.
And we want to redeploy them to JSS. That's why. Because the 30,000, every teacher per class, you know, is a very small number. Noting that the teaching areas are 12. So you realize that the teaching areas, which is 12, will need a school or a JSS classroom, will need about 4 or 5 teachers to take them through the learning areas. So if the government does not come in and identify these other qualified teachers, then they will be having a problem of the lesson being covered. But let me just say something about the learners who are actually not reported to school. This group of learners who are actually not known by anyone, and or somebody doesn't know where they are, and the figures show, because figures don't lie. There is this group of learners who actually who are in the northern region, where we have drought, where we have banditry. It is a big group, and that group can go even over 50,000. We have the group in the slums. We have so many Kenyans who have moved across. So I wanted the ministry to advise the ministry that for this to really come to an end, we are 1 month into a new term. They need to give their officers targets to make sure that in the next succeeding few or 3 weeks, this particular thing should be actually brought to an end. Okay,
because it's on that note that the ministry is committing that the learners you have mentioned, and we did cite banditry, insecurity, and different factors affecting different parts of the country, for the socially disadvantaged to be back to school or taken back to school. And of course, in a framework or a context where competency is outweighed by connections. Here is what the Cabinet Secretary Ezekiel Machogu said on the registration of grade 7, that is junior secondary school learners for KCPE, by parents across the country, warning that the Ministry of Education will take action against the same and using the National Education Management Information System to weed out learners in differentiating those who are supposed to be in Standard 8 and those who are supposed to be in junior secondary school.
Who were in Standard 7 last year who have gone to Standard 8, they are properly captured enemies, such that any parent transferring his or her child to another school, probably from levels 7 to 8, that will not be acceptable.
The honourable member mentions people who are socially disadvantaged. I mean, is that commitment vis-a-vis the numbers that we're talking about of the thousands commensurate in the sense that there needs to be the offering of the balance? And do you see that forthcoming?
Yeah, thank you. If government was very deliberate, it could get things working. because the custodian of data in this country is government. There isn't anyone who can have data the way government has it. That will be something that will work. Number two, I think there is also a context in which we need to appreciate the challenges that we are facing around the implementation of JSS. And up to 3 months ago, the country was sure that the children who will be heading to JSS will actually be going to the secondary schools. But Kenyans, in their own wisdom, decided otherwise, that the JSS should be domiciled in primary school. I personally hope that that is an interim measure and not a permanent way of domiciling. Otherwise, why would you call junior secondary in primary school? So I just hope that it is a temporary measure, because the very design of CBC is one that shouldn't really allow those children at that particular age to remain in primary school. But so when this decision was made that JSS should be domiciled in primary school, obviously we expect that all the preceding plans are to be thrown in disarray. There had been plans to construct 10,000 classrooms in secondary schools. That meant that now those classrooms, of course, had eased the pressure in secondary schools. They could not ease the pressure in the primary schools. The Teacher Service Commission, they are not here to defend themselves, but I can still vouch for them that probably they had known that there were enough teachers in secondary schools. They could have reorganized that teaching force or that teaching service to respond to that particular need. But when you're caught, when a decision is made towards December, and now you have to think about where these children will be going, obviously then you have to expect the commission to be going through the process that is going through. So this is one of the contexts that we need to appreciate as a reality. However, on the other hand, I think we need to appreciate that it is almost 3 weeks since schools opened, and learners reported, and children in private schools are learning, but our children in public schools are not learning. So the point is that, yes, we may excuse the current context, but we should not reach a place where we normalize it, that it now appears to be the norm, where the children of the poor, children from some of these areas, is normalized that for them getting an education is something that is secondary. We've seen these cases before where teachers pulled out of northern Kenya, not out of their own volition, but because of security-related challenges. But then again, we keep on normalizing results that have never been promising in parts of this country where children who are from poor households, children in geographically and historically marginalized regions, continue not registering better results. And we've kept on normalizing. So I really hope that Mheshimiwa Meli tasks the Ministry of Education and the related agencies, whether they are autonomous or semi-autonomous or not autonomous, just to be very deliberate in terms of making sure that education works for everyone. What I meant by, I just need to go a little bit back and maybe give a clarification on what I mean by, are we really implementing a national system of education? The challenge is, this is how I premise the argument, that we've left the entire interpretation of what quality education means to everyone. And as a result of that, there are people who therefore configure resourcing to align or to achieve certain results out of their own context. So you realize that if you ask schools which are performing that, what are you doing? They will basically be doing something else very different from what other schools are doing. And so it realized the point that if you are really just to take public education as public education and you walk into it, obviously this is what Martin Luther would have said. It is called the bankrupt bank. And if you are to take there the promissory note, then education will turn out to be a fake promissory note. So it's not just enough to say that we are implementing a national system of education. We have to go a little bit deeper and ask ourselves, what are the ingredients, apart from just the hard curriculum, that this is how we do things. It is, you'll come to realize that there's a very, very strong local system, which is very powerful, and that's what accounts for all these differences in terms of the results that we keep on witnessing.
Thank you. Dr. James Sierra, coming to you. The competency-based curriculum places emphasis, for instance, on communication and collaboration, critical thinking and problem solving, imagination and creativity, citizenship, learning to learn, self-efficacy, digital literacy, role play, problem solving, projects, case studies, and study visits. And when you have a chunk of the population who still support the 844 system, according to your survey, does that then mean that there needs to be a change in the tone and the public relations and the messaging of the competency-based curriculum system of education for the more than 30% of Kenyans who are still supporting or have a support for the 844 system, to really emphasize and focus on these critical thinking areas that the CBC does provide as the gateway to a socially developed society?
You're quite right. And allow me to step a little bit back and get back to what citizens said, they're the ones who pushed the government to switch from 844 to another better system. And they had already identified issues that are supposed to be addressed. And I wonder, and I find it an irony, because what they claimed is that the 844 was so skewed in favor of the rich, as in it was widening the gap between the poor and the rich. For instance, you find someone enrolling his or her child in a good private primary school, and eventually this is the same person who will go to Alliance, and that's a public school. So don't you see that there is some skewness because of the advantage this child has? There is chances for him or her to be in such a better school. So those are some of the things that were supposed to be addressed. And from what you have just said, you have listed some of the advantages of CBC in terms of promoting equality and all that. So as getting back to what you have just said, I tend to think it's the way the information has been packaged, because you have listed most of the advantages and all that. There is no ranking in terms of the areas CBC is addressing. As in, it doesn't promote cramming, which has been the norm of 844 and all that. So to me, the issues that citizens pointed out that were lacking in 844 have already been addressed in CBC. But now my worry is we have this big number, or this big percentage of citizens who are not willing to switch to that. What's the problem? To me, I think, as we have put it, it's the way we message the information. We need to repackage. We need to engage them in a simple way such that they can be able to understand. And I think that's the genesis in order to make citizens buy in the idea of implementing CBC. And I think the moment they buy in the idea, I think the implementation will be easy, because we can even find local solutions within our environment to be able to address the issues to do with cost and make CBC work.
Thank you. Let's welcome your contributions and see what you're saying on Twitter. The hashtag is Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. Here's what we're saying on Twitter. This is from Babu Michelle 1. Many parents are not able to take their students to school, Form 1s and junior secondary school. Students in some places are being taken directly to class 8. Shows how parents are feeling the burden of education. Privatization will add salt to the wound. Okelo Mwalimu says the fact that most of the KCPE graduates are yet to join Form 1 should not only worry the government, but also the society. Mop-up exercise will only result in photo sessions. The question we should be asking ourselves is, do the young ones see any value in schooling? Bob Otieno Wino says the burden of CBC has been left to many poor parents by government, and following the high cost of living has led to the high number of learners not enrolling for the junior secondary school. Remy Butia says CBC aims to produce holistic individuals with competencies, values, knowledge and skills necessary to succeed in a highly competitive world. Competence-based curriculum stimulates the minds, hearts and the souls of the learners, not stuff them with facts and figures. Some of the feedback coming from our viewers, of course, we welcome as well more contributions and feedback here on the broadcast. We'll sample them in the next 18 minutes or so towards the tail end of this broadcast. Honorable Meli, I come to you. And this is largely because of your interaction with the Teacher Service Commission and asking questions on behalf of Kenyans. For you are pivotal in seeking clarity as to the modus operandi in terms of getting many teachers on board and bridging the teacher deficit, which stands at 116,000 at the moment. But here is the question, because under the current system of education, teachers are required to change from norm reference to criterion reference, for example, situation specific, and judging the learners, the judgment of the learners. But is that capability and competency there in the teachers we are employing for the junior secondary school?
First of all, let me say that every teacher across the teaching service has to undergo a lot of capacity building, be it for CBC, be it in 844, for any other education system. The fact that a teacher is a graduate doesn't mean that he has enough competencies to teach certain specific outcomes. I just want to say that when the 844 system came in, a number of teachers were retooled. A number of teachers went into specific capacity building sessions on how to teach specific needs for outcome from the learner. First of all, the teacher had to we had to look into the ability of the teacher to communicate well, the ability of the teacher to have the grasp of the content, the ability of the teacher to assess and measure the outcome of the learning process. So as we talked this morning, last year or 2 years ago, the government asked the general teachers who are out there to go into a program. That's why you saw in our discussion, Teacher Service Commission, that there were a number of teachers who went back to training to be retooled on CBC way of doing teaching. That's why when they are being taught, in fact, we asked the Teacher Service Commission to give them better packs, better pay, because they went into a diploma training program on CBC, teaching, learning skills. The same thing with the hundreds of thousands of teachers in there in the field. The government need to have what we call purposeful, organized retooling of all the teachers, be they who are joining the service or those who are almost exiting the service. Okay. This one will enable these teachers, because when you look at Ayub, the teaching areas, what we call the curriculum design areas, we have about 12 areas. So all these teachers need to be taught, need to be retooled, and be taken through each and every aspect of the learning area. The role of the teacher in the CBC is a facilitator, as Kaburu says. He is not the center of learning. The role of a teacher here is to ensure that apart from the textbook, we have so many other gadgets that can actually inform the learning process. One of it is the phone. As much as the phone is criminalized in the school system, we need to move now to the next phase where we see the phone as part of the learning devices. So that this teacher who is coming in here will also get to know that the learner who is in grade 7, grade 8, grade 9 up to 10 is not only a participant, but can also be a co-educator. He can also be able to inform the teacher of the many things that are happening in society. So that is why we tasked the Teacher Service Commission that as much as you are recruiting 30,000 teachers, the government needs to give the education sector a lot of money. I think my committee made a recommendation that the Ministry of Education be given, and the Teacher Service Commission be given up to 1.5 billion shillings, so that these teachers be taken through the retooling process, so that the teaching learning process becomes effective, especially on competency-based. Because right now we are not talking about exams. We are talking about attitude. We are talking about the skills. We are talking about behavioral change. We are talking about the societal needs that the learner and the teacher needs to address. So you are quite true that actually the government and the society needs also, in this particular teaching learning process, even the parents themselves needs to be taught that they have a role, not to be taught actually, need to be informed that they have a role in the participation of the learning of their son or daughter in the learning process. They have a role to play. And
the involvement of the phone, because there was a debate on that as to who checks over what the learners who are minors do access, because we are living in the midst of a cheeky generation who, who are tech savvy. And Amos, there was a feedback on the need for education. I mean, two questions here. Why would someone be educated? And does our education system speak to our needs?
Thank you so much. Everyone must go through education, because education doesn't prepare you for life. Education is life. So whether you like it or not, education you will still have to go through it. The Swahilis have a saying, asiyefunzwa na mamaye bado ulimwengu utaendelea kumfunza tu. So yes, this is a highly philosophical question on the why of an education, and therefore it also brings in the question of what to be taught in education. And when I was reading the report by James, that's the opening statement. What are our children learning and such? So I think there is the question of the functionality, or rather the utility of our education. And what I've said time and again is that education has a very complex value chain. That is, by the time you convert the inputs into outputs, it is not a direct process. It's unlike when you construct a road and you can see that people are beginning to use the road the following day. It's very difficult for you, for the four of us sitting over here, to look at what role did that teacher in class 1 play to facilitate us to sit where we are sitting right now. So it's a very, very complex thing. And therefore, for us to dare and tell ourselves that we should not take our children to school, or rather we should do away with education, I think it will be extremely catastrophic. Education is a means through which societies perpetuate their own survival, and therefore it's quite important. What we need to do, and you've asked a very good question, is our education addressing our needs? Yes, it's very complex, as we've said, because there are a lot of changes. And what we are witnessing right now, there's a lot of political, social, and economic transformation that are happening. And therefore, expectations are very high, particularly the issue you raised around education facilitating social mobility, where the poor largely believe that education will give them a shot into the future. It becomes important that, therefore, that education that works for them is available. So it becomes a little bit worrying when you look at what the numbers tell you. 30,000 getting grade E's. Those who are leaving, they cannot have opportunities for them to train. Those even who have trained also don't have spaces for work and such. But that also raises the complexity of our economic models, because education in itself cannot create jobs for everyone. What we need is to stimulate the private sector, the government to provide a facilitative environment that can allow people to create jobs. How can we redirect indirectly the resources that people have from perhaps building up these high-rise buildings to begin putting up some small industries here and there, giving our children good skills so that they can create jobs for themselves and also create jobs for additional 2 or rather 3 people. But it's a long shot in the arm. It's like building Rome. It was not done in a day. If we are very, very deliberate, I'm sure that we can do something. My only fear is that sometimes we speak so much, we have a lot of these things on paper, we have a lot of theories that we've put forward, but once again, you look at, for instance, beautiful guidelines on how to implement junior secondary schools. Then you go to public schools, 95% of them don't meet those requirements. So you sit and wonder, were these requirements made for the private sector or were they made for the public sector? It just speaks to the extent to which, when it comes to implementation, everything becomes and everything falls apart. So can we follow our good intentions, our good plans with sound, deliberate implementation models, facilitate them? I like what the chair is very passionate about. Can we monitor, evaluate, facilitate institutions that have got the responsibility, what you call, they have got the duty of care to perform their work? I don't think that we've reached that particular point in time, but we will never reach a point in time where we'll say that education is not going to be a pathway. It must, it was, and it will be the pathway through which we perpetuate our survival as a society. Okay, as a society and in a country that largely depends on human resources as part of its GDP growth, and that also the government taking note of it. We'll talk about the education budget, and Honorable Meli and Amos and Dr. James, the idea of this being a central pledge by the president, who as a deputy president when he launched his manifesto, talked about the need for the education pillar in the context of addressing some of our challenges. But having said that, coming to you, Dr. James Sierra, I did look at the requirements by the Ministry of Education in terms of the junior secondary schools establishment 2 weeks before schools reopen, the need for registration on NEMIS, head teacher specialization, teaching staff availability, the number of teachers and new qualification, the availability of the internet, number of digital learning equipment and functionality, adequate sanitation facility, land and validity of the title deed, room for sciences, space for agriculture projects and tools, water supply and power supply. I mean, is this among the challenges that the respondents in your survey had cited?
Thank you. We didn't go to the details into why the citizens think that the new system is a bit difficult to implement. And even before we get to that, we need to ask ourselves, now, between the public and private schools, why is the implementation of CBC happening effectively? I think that's something that we need to understand, because if there were some fundamental issues that were not addressed, even with the previous system, I believe it's kind of adding more challenges into the new system, whereas they were supposed to have been addressed in the previous system. For instance, when it comes to people-teachers ratio, is still high. So in a private school, you find a teacher having like 20 students, whereas when you get to the public, you find the number is triple. So, and given that there's a lot of practicals in the CBC, wananchi whose children are schooling in public school, they find it inadequate, of which the main essence for it to be for us to switch from 844s to address such gaps. So there are other things that we need to address for us to be able to do the comparison. But as you're putting it, when it comes to the cost, I believe that's something that we need to address, because as you've put it, there are these requirements, we have internet and all that. And basically, this achievable in a private institution. Has the government invested enough, or what has it done in order to, okay, for instance, when it comes to internet, I believe there is almost 100% connectivity in terms of schools connected to the grid. In terms of...
that is a private majorly?
No, even with the public. There was this initiative by the previous regime to connect all primary schools. So they had already put the foundation in terms of helping CBC to be implemented successively. But I think there are some hitches that we need to address in terms of people's-teachers ratio. I'm happy that the government did something in terms of providing textbooks. But another thing that we need to ask ourselves, should we be having this textbook now and then? Because you find this year we have this, next year we have this. Don't you say that it's a burden to the government? Because unlike how it used to be when I was in school, whereby you could be able to recycle books, which is not happening. I think these are some of the things that the government needs to embrace in terms of lowering the cost. But I find it a bit difficult for public schools to be able to implement CBC effectively if these challenges are not well.
Okay, I'll go to Honorable Meli on this because, Chair, talking about the teacher-student ratio, it's very critical. It's the equivalent of the doctor-patient ratio.
Yes, yes.
And most of the secondary school teachers employed graduated in 2015, for instance, and meaning we have 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21 who have not been employed. I mean, when the Teacher Service Commission appeared before your committee, were answers provided as to why this never happened? I'm looking at the education budget, and is it about the budget not being enough, or how are resources channeled towards teacher employment in the country?
I think that it is, yes, it is the issue of resources. Let me just say that, because if you look at the teacher training in this country, it's one of the highest in the region. We have about 300 to 400,000 teachers there who are already graduated. The fact that we'll pick, the government will, in the next 5 years will employ 116,000 is not going to solve the issue of unemployment out there. Two, over the last 5 years, the last regime was employing a paltry 5,000 teachers. A paltry 5,000. It was like a drop in the sea. Noting that we have the natural attrition. Those who leave service, those who die, those who go to greener pastures, and those who retire. They have an average of almost 8,000. And I think the Teacher Service Commission went ahead to introduce a replacement mechanism. And I think the government allowed them, so that to stop this big gap actually ever expanding by trying to replace those who are leaving the service, because already the budget is there. On the other day, when we were trying to look into the employment, you realize that the teachers who graduated 7 years ago are still out there. That's why we asked the Teacher Service Commission, let those who came in late, that is those who actually graduated early, be taken in. That's the first consideration. We have the consideration of age, actually the birth age of the teacher, as opposed to the age of the learner, the age of the year of graduation. We have certain teachers who went to school late in life. And this is common in the Sahel, the ASAL areas. So somebody who went to school late would graduate, for example, when he's about 30 years, stays for 7 years, and by when he will be 40 when you are employing him. So we asked the Teacher Service Commission to take into consideration the issue of time and age, and that will actually assist them to carry out those particular issues. I just also want to say that another consideration is the issue of the learner, of the teacher coming in the teaching service when he actually graduated earlier. Not the birth age when he graduated early. Those who graduated in the year 2010, 2011, 2012, or 2015 need to be employed earlier than those who are graduated in 2020. So that is actually what the committee did. Lastly, we also asked the government to add the number of specialty areas. We have certain areas where now we have difficulty to get more teachers, especially in the sciences, the maths, the physics, the electricals, the music, and all this. This is where now the universities need to train, the colleges need to train teachers. And we also ask that, going forward, the training of the P1 teacher need to be stopped so that we up the quality of the training, and by actually introducing diploma as the minimum qualification for one to be a teacher. Okay,
but whilst you have talked about the factors that might have led to one, you mentioned the pledge, the commitment by the previous administration, yes, the paltry 5,000 teachers employed, yes, to deficit, to bridge the 116,000 deficit, and on to whether the Teacher Service Commission had equally gave your committee the plan for the foreseeable future going forward as to how this will be done, because if this pool is not well utilized, you are losing out on a large chunk of human resource.
Yes, yes. Let me just say this. On the pool of 116,000, the Kenya Kwanza administration have a very clear simulation or have a very clear roadmap on how these 116,000 will be employed. Like this 1,000, we are absorbing 30,000 teachers. The next year, the next year, we shall be absorbing another 20,000. Another 30,000. The following year, another 30,000. That will be 90,000. And then the last year will be around 16,000. So you'll realize that Kenya Kwanza or this administration plan is actually in place. And the money for it is actually provided for. So that one is going to be there. But now the big question in the room is, what will happen to the almost 300,000 who are out there? And I want to tell you very clearly, Ayub, that the issue of teacher shortage is very fluid. As I indicated earlier on, the teacher shortage is actually pegged on the lessons, the curriculum which has been established. Exactly. When you look at the designs we have now, we have 12
learning areas.
That means that the JSS class, the JSS lesson for grade 7 will require, if we are going to go with the 2 lessons, will require about six teachers for one particular class. Noting that we are going to have 6 learning areas. That will mean from junior secondary all the way to grade 12, you'll need about 24 teachers. Vis-a-vis what we have now, which is 9. So the shortage will even be more going forward.
Okay, and even as you say that the Kenya Kwanza administration is committed and talking about the absorption of 30,000,
yes,
and for posterity purposes, what then are the plans of absorbing the 300,000 who are out there unemployed, yet they are graduates? Do you have a plan for that as well?
I think the plan which is there, and I think this is now hypothetical, I don't say that, because what we had the plan was to absorb the 116,000. As a committee of education, and I think we represent Kenyans, is that noting that this will be absorbed in the next 5 years, the government needs to open up, because as I've indicated to you, the kind of teachers we need in the next 5 years will be around 400,000. Noting that they have new learning areas, we have increase in population, we have new schools coming up, having a number of teachers retiring. So that absorbing 400,000 is quite feasible.
Thank you.
And possible.
Okay, and I was looking at the numbers by the Parliamentary Budget Office shortly. I'll be coming back to you, and also Dr. James Sierra. Amos, then talking about teachers, what is part of the equation, which as well is a part of that debate, is their welfare. And some of the issues that cropped up before the Parliamentary Education Committee chaired by the chair here was the issue of the insurance cover for the teachers, for example, which is very basic. I mean, for a teacher handling learners, then who will graduate to be persons in the society who are influential, who doesn't have proper medical access in terms of insurance, who is underpaid to some extent, who sees the government as an entity which does not honor the bargaining agreement that they sign in terms of salary increment and promotions. Well, whilst we are not having this discussion in a vacuum, how then can we turn the attention on the flip side of the coin and focus on the welfare of the teachers?
Thank you so much. I think starting from there, now Mheshimiwa is beginning to recognize what I was telling him earlier on, that we are treating pragmatic questions like they are very structural questions. If you ask what is fundamental to make us move from 9 to 24 teachers, there's nothing fundamental, to be very honest, Mheshimiwa. There's nothing fundamental that forces us that we need to have 12 learning areas, fundamentally. And yet we are sitting very comfortable and accepting that that should be the norm. Yet there is no time in the history of the country when we have invested in education the way we have done now. Now what we are going to do is that in the next few years, it will be very difficult to meet those demands of us realizing the intentions of education. Because remember, this issue of teacher welfare has been around for some time. And for the last 2 or 3 years is when we've witnessed some kind of relative peace in the sector. Otherwise, teachers downing tools, taking advantage of examination periods to catch the government hard on so that certain decisions are made, especially around their welfare, because it now had to become a street issue. This issue started in 1997. And when you look at what we were doing in terms of remuneration of our teachers before 1997, one would have expected that with all this agitation, the working environment will be a bit better. But why do we still have problems with our teachers in terms of meeting their welfare needs? It goes back to what I mentioned earlier on, that our configuration of designing our education is very, very conventional. James has mentioned about the place of technology. We're talking about technology taking space, but at the same time, we are treating our teacher and technology as competitors. We do not want to see the role that technology can play in terms of helping us to cut down the cost of our education. We are talking about technologies around, but we are still printing textbooks. We are still talking about technology, but everything that we are doing is contrary and goes against the same spirit. So what I foresee is that right now we have got challenges with financing our education. We are at over 560 billion, but everyone in the education sector is dissatisfied. Even Parliament over here is telling us that it's also appealing for more money. So I'm sitting and wondering, Treasurer is saying that it cannot collect enough money, but we are still asking for more money. Everybody's still asking for more money so that we're able to address the welfare needs, and yet we are tripling the teacher resources, for instance. So where are we going to go as a country? So I think for me, what is quite encouraging is the fact that we have got institutions which are competent enough to do their work. And one of these institutions is the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development. And curriculum review is supposed to be a process that is ongoing after every 4 years. If we could begin to ask ourselves a few questions, some things are good, but do we need all of them?
Okay.
Are there areas that we can cut down so that we are able to live within our means? It's good to be aspirational, but it's also good to be very, very pragmatic so that we have got a first way of how we realize what we want to achieve. Otherwise, we will end up having this system which is very, very expensive. We are not able to meet the needs. And as usual, is the children of the poor will keep on suffering.
Thank you.
Children in private schools, their parents are willing to pay, and they are getting the whatever quality education.
Okay, Dr. Sierra, let me come to you after getting this SMS, which is the code 22422, which our viewers have used to send in their feedback as regards the topic at hand here, the education reforms in the country, the grade 7 missing learners, and some, of course, who are also part of those who ought to have reported to secondary schools. Here's what you are saying. Kindly ask Honorable Meli, what happened to the recruitment of teachers? Because they said that teachers who trained on CBC to be given first priority. But we have so many teachers outside here who spent their money to enroll on CBC. You'll be responding to that. There are a couple of SMSs. The second is, I'm a parent and I disagree with an MP in the studio. My son to be enrolled in grade 7. I was charged 25,500 and this is a public school. The government is not correct on what they say in the TV. Same school, but the same problem is there, and the government knows that parents are paying hidden money. The third says, it pains when the discussions insist that junior secondary school is free. Yesterday, for example, I was handling a case where the learners are required to purchase a locker, which is approximately 4,000 Kenya shillings, 8 kgs of maize, 2 kgs of beans, and pay school fees of 3,450 shillings. What is free here? The fourth says teachers in primary schools with a degree and having a C-plane in KCSE are better and more competent to teach in junior secondary schools. Let the Teacher Service Commission not discriminate these teachers. They are ready and fully loaded and more competent to handle junior secondary school very well. Thank you. I'm an education economist, education, and says the fifth is made deliberately by education officials and principals to benefit from looting. All public schools should be open to day learning. These public schools are now more expensive than even private schools, like Komarok South Primary School, says this viewer. Is a very new school, but parents, chokes, were told to buy padlocks for classrooms. We pay 6,000 per learner, is what he or she meant. Parents who have their children transiting from grade 6 to 7 are to pay a registration fee of 1,500. Is it okay to pay registration? Government should employ teachers of junior secondary school as well as intern to fill the huge gap of teachers needed to implement the competency-based curriculum. Please ask Honorable Meli, this is the last one, why the Teacher Service Commission is not ready to promote teachers, the Teacher Service Commission teachers with C-plane and with degrees. Honorable Mary,
yes,
loaded questions on your end. I'll come to Dr. James here. Yes, go ahead, please. In order of the questions.
First of all, let me thank the viewers for actually giving us first-hand feedback. These issues of fees, IUB is quite annoying. It is quite, shows that there is impunity out there in the field. And that's why earlier on, Kaburu just talked about the issue of government relying on NEMIS. I think the government need to go there with a big stick. The fact that we as leaders and government has written circulars, not once, not twice, severally, has made pronouncement on TVs and every other time, and now the parents are charged up to 25,000. A child who was walking into grade 6 last year is walking into grade 7 with 25,000 shillings. You need to buy a locker, 4,000 shillings. You need to buy what? And the PS and the CS just made a pronouncement yesterday, no payment. Do the teachers respect government directives? Do they take the circulars seriously, like the olden days? Is the minister being taken seriously or the PS taken seriously? And that's the question we need to ask. That a declaration has been made, no payment of fees. And just a teacher with a lot of impunity goes ahead. The Teacher Service Commission needs to swing into action and actually have a disciplinary process on this.
But Honorable Mele, before you proceed, there is, I'm looking at the hierarchy.
Yes.
There is the sub-county director of education.
Yes, that's it.
There is the county director of education. There is the regional director of education.
Everybody is there.
So how is this taking place?
That is something that we are talking here on this morning show. Is there impunity that even if somebody can actually not respect a presidential directive, what we gave out as Kenya Kwanza, no fees being charged. I think the PS and the CS should answer this. Or because the officers down there, if no action is not taken, then they are the ones to...
When they appear before your committee the next time, will you seek clarion?
That is clear answer. Not next time. We will even have an urgent meeting with them.
Yes, proceed on this. Okay, proceed with the second one before I come to Dr. James here.
On the CBC issue, I think it is quite in order that actually those who are trained, if they were pledged, they were told to go and train and they'd be taken in, it's quite correct. But I know maybe those who went for training are in thousands. Yet the government was recruiting 30,000 only. If, for example, out of 100,000, 100,000 went in for CBC training, not everyone will be taken in. Two, we also have the issue of seaplane. I think there is always a requirement for you to teach in a secondary school, that you must have had a C+ in a teaching area, must have an aggregate of C+, and therefore you will be actually taken in as a JSS teacher. That is actually the minimum basic requirement for a quality teacher, not only in Kenya, but in the region. So the fact that you can have a degree in a particular field, and therefore you want to be taken in, that is something that actually the Teacher Service Commission has set as a standard. But there is something that we talked to the Teacher Service Commission on this, especially on the graduates, that anyone who went in for further training is a graduate, either is a seaplane, he needs to be promoted because he has actually undergone further training on that. So that one is an issue that we can have time to discuss on. Okay. But actually these teachers with, the graduates with C need to be promoted, but still teach in primary. But those with C+ can be promoted and teach in JSS classes. Okay. Thank you.
Dr. James, an array of...
And maybe let me just make this.
Yes.
Yesterday when we were discussing this, we realized that thousands of teachers have stagnated. And many of them are demotivated Many of them are actually stayed in a job group for up to 15 years. And we ask the government that every year the government needs to give up to 2.2 billion shillings to ensure that over 10,000 teachers are promoted so that we have a service where people are happy, people are working, and people actually are motivated to go into that. That's what we want to do.
In what many instances you, the teachers, Mwalimu Kola, are calling? I'll come to Amos. Dr. James, vast array of responses, as was the case with your survey. And you see there are challenges, some side of finances in the implementation of the competency-based curriculum. Honorable Mary talks about the need for more teacher recruitment, bringing about all those who are unemployed from the pool of graduates who are out there. And you had your report on the competency-based curriculum. More than 30% of Kenyans still in favor of the former, that is the 844 system of education. But do you see the commitment by the government in channeling resources to employ teachers and committees like that of Honorable Mary seeking answers on better welfare for teachers from the Service Commission promotion, for instance, as a way to address the deficits, for example, that Kenyans have cited in your report for those who are not in support of the competence-based curriculum?
Yeah, I think the government is committed to address these issues, and I'm happy that because from the findings, I think, and I am happy for the views that you have just shown here, because they kind of amplify some of the issues that we had raised in terms of the cost. Because, and I justify them wanting to retain the 844, because if my child who switching from grade 6 to grade 7 happens to be asked to pay like 25,000, whereas previously nothing like that was there. So I'll be much more comfortable with the previous system compared to the new one, because the charges were quite minimal, especially in public school. And the fundamental question is, are we trying to, is the new system trying to address the inequality that has been there? And education is supposed to address such kind of issues. So to me, I think these are some of the issues that we need to address in terms of monitoring, as you have put it, whereby the government need to be serious to go to the ground and get to understand all these issues that have been raised. Because I know there are few people there who are there to capitalize on what's happening on the new system to charge extra and all that. Recently, I had this high school teacher, primary school head teacher, who told me when the government decided to have junior secondary school domiciled within primary school, he was so happy because he said, we're going to receive more capitation and all that. So you can get to see it's not a matter of him trying to play his role as a head teacher to make sure that the system works, but he's looking at the advantage that is going to get, because capitation, when it increases, they have probably loopholes in which they can be able to capitalize on that. And some of the things are quite evident, like the extra charges and all that. And they're doing it because they know probably the government, the quality, the people who are in charge of quality and all that, assessing on what's happening, they are not there. So if they can deploy these people and then they go there physically to understand this, I think that would be the genesis for us to be able to address the issue of cost that citizens have raised.
Thank you. Yes, Amos, the final word.
Yeah, I go back to where I started. Education is not working for the poor. That's basically much more what Kenyans are telling us. We have got this promise, but it is not working for the poor. So we need to go back and ask ourselves, what will we do for us to make education work for the poor? Because they are the only people who see education as the pathway to move out of poverty, not other people. For other people, it's still an opportunity to perpetuate status quo, but for the poor, it is the only exit route that they have. But if we still believe that everything that we are doing up here, it is still working, I really don't think that we are helping the Kenyan people. We must go back to ask ourselves, what does it need for us to provide education for the poor? And maybe they don't need a lot of these flamboyance, maybe they don't need a lot of these razzmatazz.
Thank you.
They just need a few things that can help them to survive. And let's go back and give these people what we just call a meaningful or a dignified education for their children.
Thank you.
That is all that Kenyans are asking for. And I don't think that is too much. That is a conversation that we must keep. That is a question that we must be very, very deliberate to answer.
Okay, thank you so much. And we appreciate your time and company here on the broadcast. Honorable Julius Mele is the Member of Parliament, Tinderet constituency, the Chair of the National Assembly Education Committee. Your time is appreciated. Amos Kaburu is an education commentator. Amos, thank you for your time. Dr. James Sierra is the Kenya country lead to Aweza East Africa, which launched a report this week on the state of education. We have a guest DJ Rambo, and who will be with us after the break here on the broadcast as Daybreak continues. And we thank you for your contributions on the SMS code 22422. The hashtag was Daybreak at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. We'll see you by the grace of God next week on Wednesday here at the same time on the broadcast. Good morning.